Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. Well, this is the third episode in the series that we're doing on ISO 22716, the cosmetics manufacturing standard. And welcome back, Derek.
Thank you, Mel.
Cool. So we're actually going to be talking all about the benefits of ISO 22716. So this is going to be a short and sweet podcast on the key benefits, both from an internal and an external perspective. Now, I know that many organisations will want to implement ISO standards because it is actually a requirement from a key stakeholder. Now, that could either be because you're looking to bid for a contract, to win that contract, or to retain a really valuable client. Now, both of those reasons are valid points for why businesses would want to implement ISO 22716 and get certified with an accredited certification body. So we know that one of the benefits is obviously to help to win business, but there are so many more benefits, both internally and externally, that Derek and I are going to have a chat about today. Should we start with the internal benefits then, Derek?
Leading on from the regulatory conversation we've just had, the internal benefits actually it shows that the products meet legal compliance. Really, really important. You don't want products going out the door that don't meet compliance. And it actually fosters legal compliance throughout the organisation. By default, people are looking at, do we meet such and such requirements? How do we meet them? And controls, it reduces the potential hazards. And hopefully, definitely in my experience, it saves money, which is really a key driver for every business.
Can I just ask you a quick question on that then, Derek? Have you got any specific examples that come to mind? You don't need to name companies or specific numbers, but just generally speaking, where you've actually seen some cost savings with some of your clients.
Yeah, cost savings, certainly I deal with a toothpaste manufacturer, I deal with a cosmetics pads manufacturer, and various organic ingredients manufacturers. And they've all personally said to me that it saved us money because, we didn't realise, our processes weren't correct. It's led to lots of internal meetings and the cost savings have been identified within those internal meetings. We've held various management reviews and it's an interesting subject to lead it back to, straight business benefits. Because it's just by default, you meet with compliance, it saves you money. No company wants to be fined for incorrect product. And apart from that, you don't want incorrect product going onto the market because it's got its own cost problems with that. I've got many experiences, or had many experiences with companies that put an incorrect product onto the market. That has cost them time, it cost them money. They've had to recreate the product, they've had to redo the product. They've lost face with customers because, they're losing customer confidence, So it's totally interlinked. Improve your controls, by default, it saves you money.
And I guess once you've got a system in place, you can actually quantify exactly what those cost savings are. Yeah. And without those controls, without systemising your way of working, it's very difficult to be able to justify what the cost savings are and justify having that quality management system in place. And so many of our ISO show listeners will have other standards in place that we've spoken about on the ISO show, such as ISO 9001, the quality standard that we've touched on in some of our previous episodes, Derek, and also ISO 14001, the environmental standard, and even ISO 45001. These are, three of the most popular standards globally. What would you say are the benefits there then in relation to ISO 22716?
Well, in relation to 22716, it's basically the same language. 9001, for example, quality standard, you already would be looking at your operations within 9001. key part of 9001 is your operational control. What this does is further support it, this 22716 standard, and gets down to the finer minutiae and the detail of what's expected. 14001, waste controls. Clause 11 out of 22716 talks about waste control. If you've got waste within a system, it leads back to, well, actually that's costing you money because you've got to send that waste out. But, what controls have you got in place in sending that waste out? But probably more importantly, how can you eliminate the need for that waste to be sent out? To me, that's probably the greater environmental saving. And then 45001, health and safety. It's aligned very nicely with the other standards. And 45001 talks about safety. And I know 22716 talks about safety of product. Obviously, 45001 talks about safety of people. So a good alignment there. You've got 22716 along with 45001. You meet both safety of personnel, most importantly, but safety of product as well.
For any startup organisation in this particular sector, it's an ideal roadmap, I would suggest, really, for managing a business. And I think what we find is that there are quite a lot of micro businesses in this space with less than 10 employees, and they do exceptionally well because they're in a niche market and they own that space with that particular product. But they might not necessarily know, I know this sounds a bit crazy, but they might not actually know how to run a business in terms of setting high standards of quality and high standards of health and safety. And that's one of the great things about this standard.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any area that's left unturned, really, apart from, I know we touched on what we'd like to see in the new version, which is about looking at environmental management and some competencies as well around health and safety. But on the whole, as you mentioned through the 17 clauses in the very first episode that we did on this standard, that's really providing a mechanism for running that business. And if you think about it, you're going to be putting such a lot of value back into your business, especially if you look at succession planning. When you come to sell a business, that's another key benefit, isn't it? Yeah. If you've got everybody singing from the same song sheet, everybody understands what the quality controls are, how to do their job, ultimately you've got less room for deviations, less costly issues, but it's going to add tremendous value when it comes to potentially selling that business. And as we know, that there's quite a lot of growth through acquisition in this industry as well. So you might have a large cosmetics manufacturing company and they go out and acquire specialists for specific products to add to their, the bigger portfolio, that range of products. So I think, based on what I've seen over the last few years and where the industry is heading, that's definitely, I think, a benefit to an organisation. But are there any other internal benefits at all that you can think of, Derek, that you've come across?
We've spoken a lot, actually, about complexity. But actually, if you take a backward step and you look at the standard actually is in very simple language. For example, you should not store anything straight onto the floor. Okay, well, put it onto a pallet then. The standard is quite clearly laid out. You must have good flow of material. It talks in straight terms. The organisation, you should have an organisational chart that doesn't cross over into different units, and that's probably for another day. But the point I'm trying to get across is that the standard is simply laid out. The complexity is probably behind each of the statements. But in terms of its understanding, it can be clearly understood. Obviously, you need to get a copy of the standard, which we can help you with.
So moving on to the external benefits then, Derek. Would you like to share some of those external benefits that could be derived from implementing 22716?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is an area that doesn't really get looked at too much, but the use of an internationally accepted regulation on ISO standards, well, actually, it can promote a lot of sales and marketing opportunities. Often, within tendering processes, You might be asked for what standards do you work to? Is it ISO 9000? Is it ISO 14? Have you got a cosmetic standard in place? So there are lots of opportunities that can be derived from having that. So, guess what? Look, we comply with 22716. We comply with 45001. Whatever the case might be. So it's a whole probably not untapped, but it's probably not sort of seen too much in terms of promotion of sales and marketing opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that certainly from what we've seen, the brand is everything to a lot of our clients that are in this space. Quite often as consumers, we want to buy a recognisable brand. And I think somebody explained to me that a brand is basically a consistent promise. So it's a promise that's delivered consistently. And it only takes a product recall or some bad publicity for an organisation to actually affect that brand. And the brand, it does literally mean everything to a cosmetics producer. So this can really help to enhance that, I would assume.
Jumping in there, Mel, it promotes ethical behaviour and certainly through the supply chain. You more and more nowadays, you have to understand what your supply chain is, and how ethical your supply chain is. Because somewhere along the line, you will be asked for that within sort of tendering programs. So, there's a lot of pressure now from external bodies in terms of what controls have you got in place or what measures have you got in place to ensure your product is safe. And again, we return to, it gives you insurance that products meet regulatory requirements, promotes regulatory credibility. It improves supply chain regulation, management of. Probably finally, it gives assurance product ingredients, meet that legal compliance. Because I think that's what people are looking for. Well, I know that's what people are looking for.
Yeah, talking about assurance, to all key stakeholders. You mentioned about insurance as well, actually. That would be really interesting to see. Yeah. If insurance costs are reduced. So it's not something we've been involved with, is it? In terms of the 22716 clients, I don't think.
Not directly, but it's sort of touched on. We're looking at insurance regimes and what's in place to safeguard, your product.
Yeah, that's maybe something we should look into, Derek, actually. I think there's a good case study there to identify if there are any potential cost savings with your, insurance provider, because obviously when you're looking at reducing risk, providing that assurance, then in theory your insurance costs could come down. I know that this is definitely true with some other ISO standards that we deal with that are risk-based. So maybe that's something we can explore at a later stage. Maybe come back to our ISO show listeners in 2023 on that.
It does get touched on, with 9001 and 14001. You're looking at insurance in some shape or form. And similarly with this. But Mel's point is, yes, it could be looked at more deeply, let's say.
I think just the last note, I guess based on experience of other ISO standards, if you're completely new to the world of ISO, is, one of the key benefits, both, from an internal and an external perspective, is having that systematic framework for managing the business. So I think that can be a key benefit both internally and externally, because quite often as a producer of a product you may be audited externally, and so by being able to present your policies, procedures, your system, then that can definitely be a significant benefit to demonstrate your credibility as a business and demonstrate confidence to those key stakeholders.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. That's about everything I think we've covered.
Yeah, great. No, it's good to kind of brainstorm some of those benefits there, Derek, both internally and externally. So I think that's all we've got time for on today's podcast. So thanks once again for joining me today, Derek.
Thank you very much, Mel.
Great. Well, I look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of the ISO show, which is actually going to be the last one in our series on ISO 22716. And that's where Derek's going to be sharing some tips for implementation. So if what you've heard over the last 3 episodes has whet your appetite for implementing a GMP, then Derek's going to be sharing some insights on how to implement ISO 22716. So, thanks very much for listening. If you found this podcast and the other podcasts that we've recorded in this series helpful for you, then please do leave a review, and any comments, would be grateful to receive any of those comments and reviews. So thanks once again. I look forward to catching up with you on the next ISO show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.